Mickle.
Here.
Bob Sleater. Here. George Ballard. Here. Joe Williams. Not here. Jim McDonald.
Here.
Bill Young, myself present. All right, everybody here except for Joe. Do the Pledge of Allegiance. Gentlemen, remove your hats. Everybody stand. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Trustee Hall had a chance to review the minutes of the March 9th meeting. Let's see if there's any corrections or anything. I need a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, Larry's made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
There was one minor, it showed a voter 2-0, I think it was 5-0 under county roads. That was good.
Oh, I fixed that.
You fix that? Okay.
I did. I got it.
What was that, Tim? You want to state that again?
She'd already fixed it. This, all county roads past 5-0.
5-0, it was 2-0 in the first draft.
Okay, sorry.
I'll second it, nobody else did.
Okay, all right. I've got a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Excuse me, Phil,
Yes.
who was the first and second on that?
Larry made the motion. Tim seconded.
Okay,
Thank you. All right, we have to have an election of the secretary.
Take nominations for Secretary of the Redevelopment Commission.
Make a motion, Tim Armstrong.
Have a nomination, do I hear a second?
I second it.
Any other nominations? Show the nominations closed. All in favor of Tim Armstrong being your Secretary, 2026 Gibson County Redevelopment Commission, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. We got auditors report here. Mike? Okay, not to report, Tim. Okay, all right. Got claims on the agenda. We're gonna go ahead and take them all in one lump. It's 165, 466, 59. All the claims are itemized on the voucher.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, we've got a motion by George. Yes, sir.
Some of these United consultant invoices are getting pretty old. Before they're paid, I need to make sure that they didn't get paid already.
Well, at this point, I mean, they called us wanting to know why they hadn't been paid.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct, and we actually had them submitted. They said they were turned into they thought they had submitted them appropriately, but obviously, I think
Okay.
one was, back in October and one in May.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
I've got a motion to pay those. Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, Tim seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. All right, we got new business, Bruce McIntosh.
Speaking to the mic here.
Yeah, turn it on. You need to turn it on.
Got it?
I don't know.
Chuck's coming up.
Chuck's coming.
All right, good. I got it loose now anyhow.
Yep.
So I wanted to take this time to tell you guys how much I liked serving on this board for the past few years. Okay? It's probably one of the best things I've done in the last few years. As a board, we did a lot of good things for Gibson County. We did some roads, we did some Toyota projects, we did some libraries, we did some gyms, we did some city infrastructure, and we built a ambulance base. All of those are good things that we probably wouldn't have done if we didn't have these TIF funds. So I just want to say I appreciated serving on this board, and it's one of the best things I did. But before I go, I'd like to pose a a challenge to this board. You five guys have been given one of the biggest decisions that you can make in Gibson County this next month. You've been trusted with choosing whether to create a new TIF. I did a little research. There's about 33,000 people live in Gibson County. We have about 100 people in this room tonight. That means that all of us here, we don't represent 1% of Gibson County. We don't represent even 0.1%, even 0.01%. We represent 0.003% of Gibson County. That means that 99.997% of Gibson County isn't here. They don't come to our meetings. That's because they trust you. They've entrusted you five guys to make decisions that they thought were wise on the old TIF. And also to make a good, wise decision on the new TIF. So I say to you, as you think about your decision, which needs to be a wise decision, and it needs to plan for the future of the residents of Gibson County, think about the 99.997% of the people and what would be good for them. If you vote in this new TIF, you'll procure maybe $30 million over the next 25 years. Over that 25 years, that money, future TIF boards will be able to do county roads, Toyota perimeter roads, Toyota projects, but they'll also do some special Gibson County projects also, like we did, libraries, ambulances, the Y. So I pose to you, think about the future. Give those future boards the ability to make the good decisions that we made when we were here. Let them fund new libraries, new Ys, something else 15 years from now. Think about that when you make your decision. So I say, please fund the TIF. Thank you for your time. That's all I got.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, next on the agenda, we got TMMI representatives. I'll turn it over to you, Stacy.
Okay, so, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate the ongoing support from the community over Toyota's 30-year history in Gibson County. We're proud to say that we have generations of team members who have worked here. In that time, we've grown to invest $8.2 billion. We directly employ more than 7,300 team members. And we've donated more than $55 million locally. For this project specifically, we're anticipating investment in our vehicle and assembly plant to be estimated about $500 million. This investment includes both Patoka and Union Townships. This is for the expansion of Grand Highlander into East Plant, which you've probably already heard about. Currently estimate the potential bond to be about $27.7 million. The creation of up to 340 new jobs at Toyota Indiana with an additional around 320 or so temporary construction jobs.
Good evening, everybody. We were posed a question in regards to a TIF or a no TIF. What might that be about? And if you look at it, and this has to also do with a little bit about our investment, what that means to in regards to net assessable value. So one of the things about if you don't have a TIF, the question of how do government entities plan for their expenditures. And I think I'm going to defer that to Baker Tilly folks because they'll have a good presentation about that today. But the one thing about a TIF, when you have a TIF, it allows government agencies funding specific above existing base values that you have. So, the TIF proposal at hand is from Toyota's initial investment, as Stacy mentioned, about $500 million. When you look at the net assessed values based upon our calculations, in Union Township, approximately net assessed value based on the average over the term of the TIF allocation area is somewhere maybe around $41.4 million. In Patoka, based upon the trended basic assessed value, which is stated through the state of Indiana, is probably about $58.75 million, like that. So, but one thing about a TIF is that over time, historically, the TIF grows, especially in the last TIF that we had, because Toyota continually invests in its plant annually. And so a concern about, would the TIF, because of that investment annually that Toyota makes in its plant, it would not stagnate, it would not appear to stagnate at the $27.7 million, which I believe was a question about that. So Toyota's initial investment is just the seed money for the TIF. History has shown that Toyota has, like I said, continually invested in the plant on a year-to-year basis, thus increasing the tax revenue stream annually, which Toyota pays annually to Gibson County. And one of the things that I know that Baker Tilly will also go over too is in the last TIF, between 2011 through 2025, and it's also what Bruce had spoken about, there was about $45.7 million in local government expenditures funded through the TIF, which is, a thing that you wouldn't have necessarily if, you're just going through the regular budgeting process about that. So it'd make it a little bit tougher how to do those things. So, but I think it gives you that flexibility when you look at that. So, I think that you'll see that over time that the TIF will not stagnate. It will grow, and again, through Toyota's continued investment on an annual basis. So, okay, all right, thank you so much.
All right. Next on the agenda is Matt Eckerly and Baker Tilly.
Thank you, and if you'll bear with me, I'm going to kind of hop back and forth between the computer and over here. They call it a paperless society, but it really isn't these days for me. So, all right, well, I'm going to start, and again, my name is Matt Eckerly. I'm with Baker Tilly. We are the financial advisors for the Gibson County Redevelopment Commission, and over the last couple of years have been working closely with Redevelopment Commission team, and also I want to extend gratitude to the Toyota team, in particular their tax people, for being so forthright with us and providing us with information, working through assumptions that allow us to prepare an analysis that is before you tonight. You might recall at your meeting back in February, I was here along with Annika, my colleague, and we presented some impact information, and it was illustrative in nature because we are still working through with the Toyota team what the actual investment would translate to in assessed value. And I know they've been working internally to evaluate that, and then also engaging with the county assessor's office to get Kim's feedback on potential assessed value for the real property component. So the presentation I'm going to run through tonight is about 60 slides, but I'm not going to go through all 60 slides. A lot of it is the same information that we provided back in February. Just thought it would be helpful to include, especially the historical information, some property tax and TIF 101 information, to include that as additional reference for people to be able to refer to easily as they're reading the rest of it. So I'm going to focus on the impacts of the proposed project as Rick had laid out. And what we've done is we've looked at 4 different illustrative scenarios surrounding the proposed establishment of a new Toyota allocation area. So scenario 1 is just current. It's certified 2026 tax rates, levies, assessed values, just so you can see the baseline where we were starting. Scenario 2 assumes that the allocation area is established and that 100% of the new development is captured in that allocation area. Scenario 2 assumes that the allocation area is established and 50% of the project generated assessed value is captured and 50% is passed through to the overlapping taxing units. And again, just to remind everyone, I know this was referenced a moment ago, the last several years, the Gibson County Redevelopment Commission has made the annual policy determination to pass through 40% of the eligible incremental assessed value to the overlapping taxing units, which means it could have captured far more in assessed value and generated far more in tax increment revenues, but it made the annual policy decision to pass through that assessed value so that the overlapping taxing units could see an earlier benefit from the development that had been taking place at the site outside of Princeton. You might recall that it took about 15 years before the Redevelopment Commission on the first project was capturing enough assessed value where they actually had space to pass through assessed value and actually start exploring other project funding outside of the core Toyota needs. Because it took that long for that allocation area to start generating sufficient revenues, because it took that long for Toyota to be spinning up operations out there. And they did have property tax abatements back in the 90s that were peeling off at that time as well. We are not modeling any property tax abatements in this scenario, or in any of these scenarios. Scenario 4 assumes the allocation area is not established, but it assumes that this new development that's proposed is still completed. So that means 100% of the assessed value generated from this proposed project is added to the tax base of the overlapping taxing units. And again, I'm using the words tax base, the assessed value very intentionally. I know last time we talked about the relationship of TIF with the overlapping taxing units, and that's really on the assessed value side of the equation. The levies are controlled by the state, so new assessed value does not necessarily generate new property tax revenues. However, TIF and capturing the incremental assessed value generated by the new project, that creates a circumstance where the revenues generated by that new assessed value get allocated to the Redevelopment Commission's allocation fund for deployment, instead of simply growing the property tax base and putting that downward pressure on tax rates due to the controlled levies. So moving on, I got some other assumptions to set the table. As referenced by the Toyota team, we're assuming $41.4 million of assessed value in Union Township. That's real property, and that's based on an average over the 25-year analysis period. It starts higher than that, ends lower than that, because they worked with the assessor's office to model in some annual depreciation of real property assessments. Patoka Township is $58.75 million of estimated assessed value, and that represents the full estimated depreciated value after it reaches its minimum true tax value under Indiana law. The real property, again, this is some refresher of last time, the real property is all assessed locally. The personal property is all self-reported by Toyota on an annual basis based on actual acquisition costs and then the mix of older and newer equipment. For a baseline, we are using certified 2026 net assessed values, tax rates, and property tax levies as the baseline information for the different taxing units. One thing I wanted to call out that I know I mentioned last time, but this is a result of a change in law from, I believe it was 2023. The tax rate for the Fort Branch Union Township Fire Territory is not eligible for TIF capture under Indiana law because that fire territory was created last year. So that tax rate, the tax base of the fire territory itself will see immediate benefit from this new development. And I'll get into some more detail on that in a moment. And then another core assumption that we use is that the tax rates for rate-driven funds, such as a township's cumulative fire fund, we're assuming that, and those aren't subject to the maximum levy limitations, there's a small exceptions, we're assuming that those are maintained at their 2026 tax rates. That would take an affirmative action on behalf of each of those units on an ongoing basis, but we've made that assumption here. So we'll go to the first analysis, or piece of the analysis in Union Township. As you see in the four scenarios, what we're looking at here is the estimated incremental, or the estimated tax rate, the estimated assessed value pass-through, the estimated tax increment revenues, the fire territory's tax rate, and the fire territory's cumulative fire fund levy. Again, because that's the one that exists outside those maximum levy limitations. So you can see as you get to the more, what we'll call aggressive pass-through scenarios, where more assessed values pass through, that is putting downward pressure on the tax rates because we're holding the levies steady. The incremental assessed value pass-through ranges from $20.7 million in scenario 3 to $41.4 in scenario 4. Tax increment revenues, we're estimating in the Union Township side, about $589,000 at 100% capture, down to $289 with 50% capture, and 0 for 100% pass-through. And you'll see that the tax rate and the levy impacts on the fire territory are the same in all three scenarios. And again, that's because for TIF purposes, you cannot capture that tax rate. The same would go if South Gibson Schools or another entity went through a referendum process to approve either an operating referendum or a debt referendum. Those rates similarly would not be subject to TIF. So those would see the immediate benefit in the tax base. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, I'll move on to the next slide. So continuing, we're also showing the property tax base evolution, the net assessed value property tax base evolution in all four scenarios. And really, it's reflecting what I showed on the prior slide just a little bit differently. So you can see, just calling out Gibson County, you're at $3.5 billion this year. It goes up to $3.56 billion in scenario 3, $3.61 billion scenario 4, because it would see the full Union and Patoka Township investment put into the tax base. Union Township, South Gibson Schools, Fort Branch, Johnson Township, they see that incremental based on the $41.4 billion or $41.4 million. And you'll see again, calling out the fire territory, sees the immediate growth to its tax base from the new investment because it can't, those rates can't be captured. And then similarly, looking at the property tax rates and levies, I'll just call attention to, in all four scenarios, the levies are held constant except for the fire fund. That's the only fund, the cumulative fire fund, I apologize. That's the only fund in this mix of these taxing units that is outside of those maximum levy limitations where new assessed value can generate new revenue. Otherwise, the assessed value's up, those levies are spread over a wider base, that's going to push down tax rates. And I'll get into a conversation about the tax rate impacts here in a moment. But showing that here, one thing that's important to emphasize, a couple of things. One, Toyota is paying taxes just like every other taxpayer. This does not exempt Toyota from any taxes, this action, if an allocation area was established. Number two, excuse me, number two, you also will see that the property tax base and those levies are at their core not affected by this action. If you were to capture 100%, that does not remove any levy ability from the overlapping taxing units. That also does not remove any property tax base that they're currently getting from the overlapping taxing units. That is held constant. You are only capturing what goes over and above that driven by this new development. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. So we've done the same illustration with Patoka Township. And that assessed value assumption is a little bit higher, so you see numbers that are a little bit higher, and obviously the tax rate dynamics in Patoka Township are different. but the overall trends are the same. The more pass-through, the more downward pressure on tax rates, the lower the amount of incremental revenues that can be generated from the project to fund infrastructure. Now, Patoka Township, a couple of years ago, dissolved the Princeton-Patoka Township fire territory. So their fire levy is still captured within the TIF, their fire rate. So if there's more pass-through in Patoka Township, that could generate more incremental revenue for the cumulative fire fund levy. But that rate is part of the TIF calculation because it is not a fire territory created after January 1 of '23. Showing similar items with the tax base. And again, you don't see the light gray highlights on this slide because there's no exempt rates from TIF in Patoka Township. So really, for all three scenarios, or for the first two scenarios where there's no pass-through, you see no growth in the NAV. We're holding all of that constant. And then 3, you see the growth from the 50% pass-through, and 4, you see the growth from the 0% pass-through. And then you see similar impacts on the property tax rates and levies in Patoka Township. Again, nothing that is currently being capped or that is currently part of these tax bases is getting taken away. And so one thing that's important to note is that the Patoka Union Township allocation area that expired after 2025, all of that assessed value that had been captured, that cannot be recaptured by this action. That's in the tax base, and that will stay in the property tax base. And even to the extent that if Toyota starts retiring existing equipment that removes from that tax base, it has to get that loss of assessed value has to get filled in by new investment before you're generating incremental revenues. So that's important to note as well, is that the tax base is always going to be made whole unless everything falls below that baseline. So we did also model impacts for taxpayers in Union and Patoka Townships, and also in Princeton and Fort Branch, so we could look at a couple municipalities as well. So again, translating that lower tax rate to what it would mean to the taxpayers in the different scenarios, and again, holding these values constant, you see, it could potentially drive some savings. In Union Township, you would see savings just based on the fact of the downward pressure on the fire territory's tax rate. And we're assuming this is based on a median home value of $180,000, applying the current deductions for homesteads. So you see the difference is about $15 for scenario 2, $32 to baseline for scenario 3, and $48 for scenario 4. We also looked at 10 acres of ag land, and similarly, you see it's about $4 for the baseline capture, $9, and this is annualized. $9 for 50% capture, $13 for no capture. Patoka Township, you'll see you don't see that downward amount in scenario 2 like you did in Union Township. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but that's because of the fire territory dynamic. With 50% capture, you see about $19.75 in savings. 100% pass through, you're looking at about $38 in savings. Again, that's holding all else constant. For ag land, you see it's about $41 of savings for the 50% pass through, $46 for the 100% pass through. And then we also looked in Fort Branch, and this mirrors Union Township because you see those overlapping units. The town of Fort Branch itself, its tax rates aren't going to be affected because the town of Fort Branch doesn't include any of these parcels that would be designated in this allocation area, and there would be no new development in those parcels, in town limits. So that's why it mirrors Union Township. We did the same with the agricultural land.
And note, that's for 10 acres,
Correct.
For 10 acres, yeah. I used to always use 1 acre, and someone pointed out to me, Matt, no one owns just 1 acre of ag land. I'm sure there are people. So I thought 10 acres would be a better representation. And then we also looked in the city of Princeton. Now, one thing that you'll note about Princeton is that there's no impact in any of the scenarios for the median homeowner that we're estimating now. And that's because their tax rate is at a level where even these reductions, it doesn't bring a median homeowner taxpayer below the tax caps. So this what would happen is it would reduce somewhat the tax cap losses realized by the city of Princeton in the overlapping units, but the taxpayer would not see an impact because of the composition of the overall tax rate. Similar with ag land in the city of Princeton. Now, we also, to kind of put a bow on all of these relationship discussions, is we looked at the historical property tax liability just to show how the operation of the expiration of the Patoka Union Township allocation area, how that affected taxpayers in these same taxing districts. Because we thought that Gibson County is an object lesson for the interplay of assessed values, property tax levies, tax rates, and then the follow-on impacts on taxpayers. So, looking at 24, 25, and 26 in Union Township for that same median homeowner. Now here, we have made adjustments to the assessed value to reflect the changes in law that have been imposed over this 3-year time period on the homestead deductions and credits. So you'll see that actually the assessed value, even if the gross value stayed the same, the assessed value actually ticked up in 2025, then back down in 2026, which I found interesting. And that's just due to the calculation of those different credits. No, not the credits, the deductions. But then applying the actual tax rates for each time period, you'll see that the tax rate went down significantly from 24 to 25, but then ticked back up in 25 to 26. So, the tax rates or the tax liability still dipped down year over year, but it was driven differently, somewhat by reductions in assessed value, in taxable assessed value, and some by tax rates. We did a similar exercise with ag land, and I think as everyone knows, the state dictates the base assessed the baseline assessed value for an acre of agricultural land. So this takes that into account. It applies the new agricultural land deduction for pay 26, but then also looks at the layering and the tax rates. And you'll see that those taxes for ag land in Union Township have actually ticked up the last couple of years. Patoka Township, you'll see dynamic where it ticked up from 24 to 25. That was when the fire territory was abolished between 24 and 25. And then from 25 to 26, you saw all of that Toyota assessed value that had previously been captured being layered into the tax base. And so that drove down tax rates by, in combination with other items, but by almost 56 cents. And so that resulted in a savings to the agricultural land taxpayer in Patoka Township. Sorry, we have the homeowner as well. And you'll see that actually they saw zero difference from 24 to 25 for the median homeowner. That's because of the tax caps. But from 25 to 26, it actually brought the median taxpayer down below the tax cap amount. And so I already hit the ag land. And so in Fort Branch, the city or the town of Fort Branch, you saw that, again, the combination of factors, they've actually, median homeowners in Fort Branch have seen taxes go down. Now, again, this isn't assuming that their value is trended each year, so that's a separate item, but we're just isolating for this conversation. For ag land, it actually ticked up the last couple of years. City of Princeton got that same circuit breaker dynamic with homesteads, but they still saw a savings headed into 26. And then with ag land, similar. And the ag land is really driven, if you have ag land in the city of Princeton, that's driven by the new assessed value deduction that was imposed through Senate Enrolled Act 1 adopted last year. The rest of this is information that all of you have seen before. Again, wanted to include it for reference all in one spot. Phil, I don't know if you want me to take any questions from the board while I'm up here. I'll defer to you.
Questions from the board?
And always happy to follow up answering questions offline. I know Phil's been peppering me with some.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of questions, and the result of some of the lower numbers there, was it that's just a result of the assessed value being passed through?
Exactly. What this really shows is that depending on where you're at in Gibson County, you are affected by the expiration of the Toyota TIF very differently, because every taxing district has its own unique composition, and only those handful of taxing districts directly overlap with Patoka Township.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Matt, I was using your impact statement from 2 months ago. And, like, for instance, Patoka Township tax rate in 2025 was $2.30. And now in 26, the tax rate has dropped to $1.75. I'm rounding up 2 cents. That is a 32% reduction. So, assuming everything else constant, which you normally consider constant, the Patoka Township tax rate dropped from $2.30 down to $1.75. That's 32%. So is that saying that in 25, when it was captured, when we had the capture going on, that Patoka Township tax rate was overinflated to a third because of the Toyota capture?
I think overinflated is a term of perspective. And I understand, the chuckles about that, but there's the operation of the TIF, and looking overall at the entirety of the investment out there, yes, if 100% of those taxes, or if that assessed value had been passed through, yes, you would have seen a lower tax rate. But then that also, you need to think about, would all of that assessed value have been present to be passed through but for the use of TIF back in 1995?
Why wouldn't it?
I wasn't in the room in 1995, but it's my understanding that the TIF was critical to being able to fund the infrastructure to make this development possible, so that Toyota could have invested all of that money over that period of time. That was the finding back in 1995, and that has been kind of the consistent relaying of information to me, certainly through my career working with Gibson County. So if the facility were to have been constructed without the use of any TIF, and all of that investment would have occurred without the use of any TIF, yes, that tax rate conceivably could have been lower. The question that was evaluated at that time was, is the TIF, and that you're evaluating somewhat here, is that TIF necessary to incentivize the investment, or would the investment happen without the TIF?
In 1995, this could have been called a blight area maybe. And the administration back in 1995 gave their firstborn to get growth into the county. But I don't think first of all, the purpose of a TIF back then, it was to entice industry to come in to blight the area, which it did, and it was very helpful and very supportive. But now, everything's established. It's a growthy community. As far as business, it's being held back from the entities for the towns and the entities that hasn't been getting The way I understand it, North Gibson School Corporation back in 2000, from 2010 into 2016 or 17, was struggling to make ends meet, and that they kept asking for more pasture and more pasture. And history repeats itself. And so we don't need to do that for another 27 years. By the way, I think instead of it being a 25-year TIF, the clock starts when the first payment's made, and that won't be made probably till 2027, is that right? So that the end, instead of 25 years, it will be the previous 30-year TIF. It ended in 30 years after the resolution, after the declaratory resolution was signed. But now the way I understand it, it doesn't have to end until the first revenue is produced, which would be in a couple years.
The clock's going to start ticking when the first obligation is incurred. So if you were to close on bonds, and Heather, please correct me if I misspeak here. Heather James from Ice Miller, who's bond counsel, is here as well. If the closing occurs December 15th, 2026, then that 25-year clock will start December 15th, 2026. So it's tied to the incurrence of the obligation, not when the first payment is made.
I thought according to your impact statement, it said, and it might have been an obligation, but I assumed like in the 1995 era, the first TIF money wasn't actually generated until June of 1999. So that was 4 years.
Correct. Yeah, it usually takes time. If this redevelopment commission acts, this month, next month, 2 months from now to establish the allocation area, the base assessment date will be January 1 of 2026. Taxes payable in 2027. So your first opportunity for revenue won't take place until 2028. But if you obligate that at any time this year, the clock starts in 2026. The 25-year clock starts in 2026, not when the first revenues are generated. Back in 1995, this allocation area was established. The Indiana code was different, and it just mandated a rote 30-year term for allocation areas. Now it's tied to when the obligation is incurred. So it has changed.
And I'm assuming that the battery plant is sitting out there isn't on the tax rolls yet, so it will be 100% captured?
I have not seen any sort of preliminary assessed values for this year, so I can't speak to where that's at. But whatever the assessed value of those parcels are for January 1 of 2026, which the assessor's office is working through assessments right now, I'd imagine, and that's going to start flowing through the rest of the process. Whatever those assessed values are, that's going to stay in that base assessed value. There's no action that the redevelopment commission can take to retroactively and say, oh, well, it actually got assessed at this. We want to go back to last year's assessment. So when we see whatever that assessment is for January 1 of 2026, that's what's going to be locked in.
So are you saying the $500 million building that's sitting out there won't be captured?
I don't know what that building is being assessed at right now.
Well, if it's assessed at anything, but what I'm saying, it's not on the tax rolls yet, so it's not.
It's not on the tax rolls for anything right now. So whatever it gets assessed at January 1 of 26, that assessed value will be with all the taxing units. The TIF will only be generated on whatever incremental value is generated from finishing out or whatever those assessment calculations are. So I don't know if it's going to be assessed as partial assessment. I don't know the answer to that.
That'd be a big question to ask.
I would have to defer to the assessor's office.
There won't be much base passed through. For Union Township, there'll be very little base that's passed through to the entities. If that battery plant is just sitting there that's not assessed until it gets complete. Generally, on a house, it's not getting assessed until it's complete. Is that correct or not?
My experience is that every county does a little bit differently in that regard. Now, it's assessed differently when it's in use versus in process. I do know that. I can't speak to levels of that because that's outside of my field of expertise.
Another question people have asked me, if it's not captured, I've had several people ask the question, they was told that if we didn't form a TIF district, and so no money was captured, what happens to that money?
To the property taxes paid by Toyota,
Yeah.
it would be allocated to the overlapping taxing units as any normal property taxpayers' monies would be. But that would not be new money for those taxing units.
Probably, it could only increase in the taxing entities up to right now, it's 4%.
Yeah, it was 4% from 25 to 26.
And then the overage, I was told that would go to Indianapolis and we would never see it again.
No, none of the property tax money actually flows through Indianapolis. But the folks in Indianapolis dictate how it's distributed to the overlapping taxing units.
Right.
And because of those levy controls that I mentioned earlier and that you just referenced, to the extent that the assessed value of just overall, let's take the TIF out of the equation, just overall, the assessed value, say, it increases for the entire county at 10%, but your levies only went up 4%, that extra 6% over and above that levy cap is going to put downward pressure on the tax rates.
It would go into the assessed valuation along with the other taxpayers' money.
Exactly.
Right.
That assessed value would just grow, and then you would be spreading that controlled levy over a wider base, so you'd have a lower rate.
And so that is why the Patoka Township tax rate dropped 32%, is because there's this infrastructure, there's this whole operation out there. I think they said there's $700 million sitting out there in the first plant that's on the tax rolls. So that tax will go in to the rest of the taxes.
Yeah, when that allocation area expired, the release of the 60% of the eligible assessed value that had previously been captured, that was, I'm very comfortable saying, that was the primary driver in that tax rate decreasing by the amount that it did.
And I might be wrong, but I think I'm pretty close, that there's been $200 million captured in the last 30 years. And according to your illustration here that you sent before the public hearing that was supposed to be done, I wouldn't call that much of an impact statement, but I used it, and there was good numbers for me to work with. At 48 cents of the $1.75 went to Gibson County. Now, assuming that would go back to county council, at 48 cents, I rounded to 50, but at 48 cents, that was a portion of Gibson County.
Sorry, I'm trying to go back, Larry, so I think I've got. So the county's tax rate, yeah, the certified tax rate of the county unit for 2026 is a hair over 48 cents.
Yeah.
So to the extent that you have that growth in assessed value and you keep that levy at $17 million, that 48 cents goes down. But that $17 million stays the same that the county council deploys in its kind of natural budget process. And the same would be said for any of the overlapping taxing units.
I get asked questions all the time. How does that affect me if I'm not in Patoka or Union Township? And I came up with the idea that at 48, say 50 cents of the $1.75, is 25% of the tax rate, so $1.75, that tax rate, and if the county, it would go into the general fund, or the assessed value fund. But that's 25%, so basically 25% of this money being captured actually affects the whole county.
So, yeah, the county rate and the county solid waste management district rates are both applied to every taxpayer in Gibson County. Now, the proportional share of those rates to their overall tax bill is gonna vary pretty widely depending on whether they live in a township or a municipality, which township, which municipality, which school district. So it's not gonna be just a fixed 25% for every taxpayer, but that is the component of the tax rate that affects every property taxpayer in Gibson County.
So then, if 25% of it, if that's been constant for 30 years, which it hasn't been, but just assumptions, at 25% of that money that's been captured, which has been roughly $200 million, it would have been without the original TIF district. 25% of 200 million is $50 million. That would have went back into the county tax rolls for county council to work with, or the tax rate would drop, or however that worked out, but it went in back to the general fund somehow, whether it would have decreased the tax rate, or it gave county council more money to budget. You see where I'm getting at? 25% of that captured money was actually county money.
I'm not comfortable saying that it was just 25%. And I know you understand this because we've talked about this before. There's just far more of it that goes into that. But I do want to emphasize that doesn't mean that if the plant was constructed even without the use of TIF to develop the infrastructure, that doesn't mean that the money that was allocated to as TIF revenues over the years, you're using $200 million. I don't have the figure readily available. That doesn't mean that was $200 less revenues that went to the overlapping taxing units. I want to emphasize
I'm not
that.
saying that.
Okay, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page there.
I'm saying that it didn't go. It would have decreased taxes.
It would have put that downward pressure on tax rates, holding all else constant.
My comment there a while ago was the Patoka Township taxpayers, if it's been consistent for 30 years, has been paying, which it hasn't been for 30 years, but as it's been, it's roughly a third of their tax rate actually went because of the money being captured.
I wouldn't say that it's because, but I understand the math that you used there.
But I would correct, though, as Patoka Township resident, I would have loved for it to be a 32% reduction in taxes. It was not. It was a 24%, which is still massive. It's a huge number, Larry, but you say 32, 32, 32, it's 24. But it's a huge impact. It is a big change, and I appreciate you asking this question. I also appreciate you highlighting what that pass-through impact is like on the schools and other taxing entities, that it does have a big impact on what's going on. A follow-up question for Matt, Mr. Eckerly. You talked about how Fort Branch Union Township is exempted specifically by law, and so they're not a part of the TIF capture, and their revenue will be steady and constant, and they will have a positive impact by this investment. If, for example, other entities established a fire territory, would they also fall under that exception, or do you have to be in place prior to the TIF?
No, it's any fire territory created after January 1 of 2023. So if Patoka Township and Princeton decided to recreate a fire territory, the same would hold. If any of the units created a fire district, which is a much more complicated process, they would also be exempted from the calculation.
As would any referendums.
As would any referendum rates, correct. And I know there aren't any referendum rates here in Gibson County, but my experience working with TIFs all over the state, we see that in our K-12 people who work with school districts, including North and South Gibson here. They're always modeling that in when referendums are being contemplated. I'm not saying any referendums are being contemplated, but that's part of the calculus.
Doing our best to avoid those.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying elsewhere in the state where we see it.
There's 80 in the state, last I heard.
Is it 80? There's just new ones each time. It's hard to keep track.
Is it also safe to say that for the first 15 years that we've highlighted, the economic development bonds were what was used to pay for the roads, the infrastructure, the sewer, the traffic signals? That was the 100% capture of that. Took every bit of that for the first 15 years to
Yeah.
pay off all those bonds, which Toyota paid for.
Yeah, it took a while to get to the point where there's sufficient revenue to service that debt and then also create the opportunity for pass-through or funding other
That's where
projects.
we went to 60/40 in 2015 or somewhere in that.
Somewhere in there.
Area there, which allowed for some of the other projects. I think what's important to note here would be if the roads are assessed right now, just the improvements, 46 million, 45,940,000 is what's needed between now and 2033 to get everything up to par. Estimated 15 million, I think the gentleman here will have a number for that for the sewer. So the 27.7 million that we're looking at possibly capturing if we would adopt the TIF is gonna fall 40-something million short of and this is the initial investment. I get that, but even if we were to capture at 100%, 25 years is only gonna generate 27 million. And we need upwards of 76 million. And that's not counting the 13 million resurfacing that needs to be done in 2042.
Yeah, and as you referenced, our preliminary estimates are right now that if you were to leverage the estimated revenues over a 25-year period with a bond issuance, that the principal amount would be about $27.7 million. So yes, that is short of the amounts that you cited. The hope would be that, if Toyota continues to invest or other avenues might be available to fund the balance. But that becomes a very real financial planning exercise after the initial action.
Hope is generally not a good strategy.
No, hope is not a strategy at all.
Let
I
me
probably
ask you
chose that word
this,
poorly.
well, if the TIF is voted down,
Well,
what do we expect?
What? Hold on. The board's speaking to them. We don't need to have conversations coming from the crowd, all right? We need to do this orderly, so please hold on, okay? The board's asking Mr. Eckerly questions. Thank you.
I mean, what type of options are there for funds at that point? I mean, if it's voted down, well, I mean, what happens? We own the roads out there. It's in the county's inventory.
Sure.
So, I mean, simply to say that we can't maintain them or, I mean, it's not an option, or at least ethically, I wouldn't think it's an option since we own it.
Yeah, and then that, requires for the road infrastructure, the county taking a look at its holistic financial position. What do they have ready access to today? What are the estimated revenues and needs over the next several years? And, what debt levers can be pulled if the needs exceed those immediately accessible resources? And generally speaking, for roads, for counties in Indiana, that's income tax supported bond issuances.
And that would be how the council would have to do
The county
that?
council would have to do that. Heather could outline the full processes if you wanted to go through it. But yeah, that primarily runs through the county council. There's other mechanisms that can be used too, but.
It's true, but currently, we don't really feel comfortable with income tax as a security for bonds,
Yeah.
given some recent legislative changes, so I'm not sure if that's a real option.
It is complicated, the use of income taxes to fund any sort of projects, whether that's roads or just general government infrastructure. So then you're also looking at property taxes, and I don't believe anything has changed, Heather, but counties cannot use property tax dollars to fund road projects, which is a quirk of Indiana law that I've been told goes all the way back to the days where they thought canals were going to be the primary mode of transportation.
Didn't they have the surrounding
Tulip Tree and all that, wasn't that originally owned by Toyota and then it was deeded over to the county?
I can't speak to the
And it-
particulars.
Couldn't we deed that back to them and then maybe they would be able to take care of that on their own? See, it's how that road's only used for Toyota traffic.
That would be a negotiation kind of outside the scope of what I'm here today to talk to, but I do understand your point there.
I think it was deeded over to the county in 1996, I believe.
How much money does the county, and this may be a Chuck Lewis question, but how much money do we receive every year for roads in Gibson County beyond TIF?
I do not have a
I
ready
think it's
answer.
$3,050,000 a year to maintain the roads.
That's pretty close.
For 923 miles of road. That's everything from paving, to patching, to chip sealing, to gravel for gravel roads, to salt and sand for snow removal. That's the whole shoot match.
So how much money do we receive for the TIF, the Tulip Tree Drive? What does the state give us for that?
We receive our money on, and they've just changed some of that. It's a direct lane mile distribution. So for every mile of road times, it's 5 lanes wide in places or whatever, that's the amount. But the total, the annual total goes down to $3,050,000.
Yeah, I got that number from Matt. Whenever I seen the original was 70 million in estimates on what was required for road improvements. And that had some state projects in it too, so I asked for that to be itemized, so that we could talk specific about it. And it came in at $45,940,000. And it itemized, Hannum, Wagle, and Klein itemized the years that it would need. And this 45,940 million is what would be spent between now and 2033. And that's traffic signals, lights, everything. So not counting any of the funds that may be needed or required from the state also. That list, I mean, if there's more traffic, so.
The amount we receive for lane miles on the perimeter roads out there do not even cover the repairs and maintenance contract with the traffic signals.
According to Matt Eckerly's figures, the Toyota perimeter roads generate $20,398 per year. And $8,400 per year for electric bills on the signals and roadway lights. The highway starting to talk about upgrades needed. Someplace in here, I think he said that he's $134,000 deficit just on electric, on the stoplights.
I don't believe I generated what you're referring to.
No, Matt Holt.
Okay.
Matt Holtman, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, there's two Matts.
Electrical contractor in high school, I was like, I know a little bit about electricity.
Our county engineer is Matt Holt.
Okay.
And he's basically saying he cannot afford, he's only got $3 million a year budget, and $20,000 of it is generated from Toyota roads.
Okay.
Because it's based on lane miles.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt, any other questions from the board? Yes, Joe.
So, turn this back on. Mr. Eckerly, if there's not a desire or a community input or support behind the idea of a TIF which localizes the impact of the tax assessment, captures that increment value, puts it towards projects needed in that locality, and we have this over the period of years, 47 million, how does a county raise that funds?
It's going to be what I referenced earlier. It's going to be a financial analysis of what's your capacity, what are your capabilities, and as referenced, if you do need debt because the expenses come, this year, next year, and your revenues are coming over Heather mentioned, when income taxes are your primary means to fund these projects, the changes from Senate Enrolled Act 1 adopted last year, House Enrolled Act 1210 adopted this year, makes borrowing against income tax revenue streams much more challenging. Not impossible, but it is very challenging. So that limits your toolbox considerably.
So you're limited there, and then also, are there not other mechanisms that you can localize the impact of that tax increase? Otherwise, it would be generally spread across all of Gibson County.
No, there's not anything equivalent to TIF that could be leveraged and localized to the way you're talking about. There's some tools out there that aren't widely used in Indiana because they're much more complex.
Appreciate that, then. Answered my questions.
And as it stands right now, from what you're seeing, the estimated total life of the revenue would be, or 25 years of revenue would be $27.7 million.
That's the principal amount that could be generated based on a set of assumptions we've been workshopping with Toyota. The actual revenues that we're estimating at this point in time are about, again, this is all preliminary, and the bond stuff especially, that's gonna take a whole other set of procedures. We're estimating the total revenues to be closer to $44.8 million.
Which still puts us at a $30 million hole.
If you were able to convert all, yeah, to your point, if you were able to convert every penny of that to principal, that still leaves you short of those numbers that Phil was referencing earlier.
So in a simple way of looking at it, if I take 44 million, divide by 25 years, that's about how much each year?
Yeah, it's weighted more on the
Right.
front end because of depreciation, but yeah, for the exercise you're describing.
Where does can you explain where you're saying 40 million, you said 27.7, what's the difference?
The 27.7 is the principal that could be supported by that 44, so we would first back out an
That's all you would be able to get a bond for?
a bond for, yes.
Okay, all right.
So first, we're backing out an annual allocation for the Redevelopment Commission to operate,
Yeah, got it.
and then the rest of it's split between principal and interest.
Yep, yep, okay, all right, understand. Yes, Larry?
Can you explain a little bit what happened with the Indiana tax code, like the Senate Bill 25? Back in 2025, the Senate Bill -1, and what happened here recently, is that affecting Toyota's taxes? It seemed like that 27.7 million, there was a lot more money than that generated in the previous years. And in 1995, the projected cost of Gibson County was between 45 and 60 million, according to the Declaratory Resolution 1995. It was estimated by Umbald to be between 45 and 60 million. Well, it ended up being $100 and some million bonded. And on this this declaratory resolution, it says it's gonna cost the county $25 to $35 million to fund, and now it's already up to, I'm gonna call it 120 million, 70 million for roads, and plus 13 million to redo the roads, and plus the Princeton Sewer. We're talking over $100 million already, and we haven't even okayed it yet. There's gotta be somebody not figuring something right. I had to go from 25 to $35 million. I said 125 to $135 million when I first read that, and I'm a whole lot closer than the 25 million that was proposed on the resolution. Can you shed some lights on those subjects?
Well, I do know that, and Heather, please correct me where I might misspeak, the amount that was in and Jim as well, please, The amount in the declaratory resolution, those amounts were put in there before the full picture had been painted in terms of all the estimates coming in. So those were initial, very rough estimates for some initial expenditures. And the amounts in the declaratory resolution aren't always, I mean, you cited back in 95, with the original efforts, those are often, that piece of the process is completed before a lot of the total need is defined. So you're doing the best with what you have at that point in time, and the amounts that are cited in the declaratory resolution are not binding. Is that correct? So you're dealing with best estimates until you get all the information in place. And when the declaratory resolution is being drafted, there weren't, full-on estimates for every piece of the infrastructure. I understand your point, and that's one of the kind of constant struggles of these processes statewide is you're making some determinations before the full picture has been painted.
One more comment. If it's 27 million or 45 million or whatever that's going to be generated from 100% capture, and we've got we're looking at $100 million that's needed so there won't be any pass-through for probably for the life of the project. So any promises that's been made that the entities might get some pass-through probably isn't going to exist because the resolution spells out 100% capture for 25 years.
Well, that can be modified.
And that can be modified, but in other words, if like South Gibson needs to borrow money or something, I don't know what they're going to get until they come and beg for some pass-through. And then if they don't have it, what do they do?
Well, what I would say first is that, and this was referenced by the Toyota team, these are all initial estimates based on their conservative initial phase investments. So past as precedent, it took a long time for the original, and we've already talked about this a lot tonight, but it took a long time for the original allocation area to generate sufficient funds where you could get into pass-through. If past is precedent again, we could end up in a similar circumstance where there is that opportunity in the future. And then what I would also say, a precedent that has been established by this redevelopment commission, I think we started back in 2009 or 2010, started annual meetings with North Gibson schools and South Gibson schools at times too. I know we met with South Gibson with the ViewTech project several years ago, where the redevelopment commission is, it's required by law each year by June 15th to make a determination on pass-through and capture for the next calendar year. So annually, the redevelopment commission would meet with North Gibson schools, South Gibson schools, other units as needed, to discuss, hey, here are our current estimates on where things stand. They would always have us model a couple different pass-through scenarios. The 60-40 became the baseline, but we'd look at 50-50, 90-10, depending on where things were at each year, project needs, things of that nature. We would meet with North Gibson schools and lay it out so they could then work with their advisors at Baker Tilly to understand what their financial resources were given those set of facts. And they always had input on the amount of pass-through. Now, there were several years where it was determined where the pass-through setup was more advantageous for them because of some of the quirks in state laws that pertain to certain funds that they had. But there was always that engagement, and I know from, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, just talking with Phil and Jim about this project as it's evolved, there's no indicated intent to do anything different going forward, so that the school district, other taxing units would have the information they need to evaluate how this allocation area, should it be created, interacts with them so they can go through effective financial planning exercises. I'll say, I've said this to this board before, and I've said this elsewhere, I've often cited Gibson County as an example of how it should be done in terms of that communication.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda, Dean Rogers.
I had a question, Dr.
Jim? Yes, sir. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. Step. Rick. Yeah, Rick, sorry, I called you Jim there.
I just wanted to kind of highlight what I discussed before, in that the initial investment is in regards to the $27.7 million in funding. That's not a cost. I mean, maybe I misunderstood what you said, but it sounded like you said that was a cost. That's funding. So it's not I don't believe it's $100 million. The costing that you're looking at, I believe in the study that you're looking at, was less than $100 million. But the initial funding that happens from that, from the initial investment that Toyota is making to help with the funding for that. And then, like I said, historically, under the previous TIF, through Toyota's continued investment on an annual basis, has brought in positive revenue, tax revenue that comes into the tax allocation area. So you're not going to stagnate at the $27.7 million of funding. There's going to be, like I said, historically that's been that way. So I just wanted to clarify that again. So it sounded like all you were going to get is 27. Well, historically, that has not been the case. If that was the case back in 1995, you would never had $45.7 million in additional funds to spend on a library, a YMCA, all those things like that. You would not have had that. But again, as Toyota's continued investment in that over the years, it created positive revenue into the TIF allocation area of that. So Toyota continues to pay its taxes. It's always paid its taxes like that throughout its time in life here, and will continue to pay its taxes like that. So I hope that clarifies a few things there.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that's obviously off the initial investment.
Correct.
And I
yeah.
think, if we were to look and say, based off of that, the economic development bond would have to be for that amount to pay for the roads. And I think my assessment of asking Matt Holden for how many millions were going to be required was based off just the first initial investment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in that sense that it is.
Yeah,
like that.
no, I agree. I
First.
mean, I think that obviously Toyota's proven they'll continue ongoing investment, and hopefully that continues.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Rick, do
Yes.
you know how much property taxes did Toyota pay to Gibson County this past year? Do you know that number?
Over the past year,
Just a year?
I think we paid almost $17 million, I believe it was, if I remember correctly, the amount.
What'd you say, sir?
17 million around there,
17.
close to that. I think over our lifetime, Toyota's paid about over $275 million in property taxes to Gibson County. So that's, since our time here like that, that's when we first were tax eligible to pay.
Had one more.
Yeah.
So you said $17 million is what Toyota paid in property taxes.
I'm just trying to speak off of recollection. I don't have that actual number.
Just an example there. At our TIF budget, we got $10 million in distribution to spend that we captured.
Well, there's a capture and pass-through, so you have to, the amount of capture plus the pass-through is what Toyota would have paid in taxes.
Yeah.
So you can't.
It's roughly 17 to 18
That's
million.
correct.
We captured 11 million and passed through 7 million.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's,
Okay.
again, if it's $17 million, y'all determine, well, that's kind of hard to multiply. Just say it's $20 million we paid in taxes. If you said 60% was capture and 40% was pass-through, so that's what you would figure, that would be the allocation of that $20 million.
Yep.
But Toyota would have paid the gross amount, and then the redevelopment commission would determine what was capture and pass-through.
Right, based
Yeah.
off the expenses.
Correct, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at the public hearing, that was 2 months ago, this room was full of people, and the consensus was, and it was obvious, that there was a huge percentage of taxpayers here. And they said, and you was here too, that they really appreciated at the family working together, the Toyota family were working with the taxpayers, because Gibson County needed a boost. But now, we're hurting for money. It looks to me like redevelopment isn't gonna be able to fund all your want list of $70 million in road improvements. And I came up with the theory, I presented a proposal a month ago that redevelopment, the county commissioners, county council, and Toyota sit down and discuss what can be done and transfer some of that burden over to Toyota. I'm out in the public a lot, and taxpayers always ask me questions. And so number one thing is, I just got done figuring 32%, and those figures as an example, but like Patoka Township tax rate is overinflated from what it would be if we wasn't spending money on the infrastructure. I feel it's time to do just like the taxpayers of Gibson County, and there's people here in the room that talk to me. They put their own sewage treatment, they put their own Princeton sewer out on the other side of 41 to get it there, and they bore the whole expense. And anytime that we add water, we put in, people said they put in three-phase electric and ran it a half a mile, and it cost them $100,000. And gas. And anytime a resident hooks onto water line, they don't understand why Toyota doesn't have to do that. They feel it's time. Toyota is a taxpayer now, and Toyota ought to be doing the same thing as what the general public is experiencing, and pay for their own infrastructure.
Well, we pay, Toyota, like every other taxpayer, pays its water fees also.
Right.
We don't get that for free. We pay that water fee annual basis too. I don't remember the exact number that
We
pay,
have
but-
to run our own water,
Yeah.
and run our own electric, and run our own sewage. As taxpayers, the county is not involved. We work directly with Centerpoint and the city of Princeton, and it's got to be a working relationship. We just can't fund this ourselves and come up with all this money. I hear complaints every day. And that public hearing 2 months ago, we're not paying a damn bit of attention to it. The words, because it's not being brought up. And that's why all these people are here again, and to remind them, to remind this board that, hey, we're still here and we're still hurting. And you guys need to sit down and negotiate with Toyota. And I'm speaking for the taxpayers of Gibson County. That's what I came on this board for. We need to negotiate. The county council, county commissioners, TMMI, and redevelopment all need to get their heads together and work this thing out, because it shouldn't be this 5-member board making these decisions. That's the way I feel about it.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Dean, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Good evening, Dean Rogers with Wessler Engineering. We're contracted with the city of Princeton to design improvements to their wastewater system. Matt had 60 slides, I've got 6. I'm gonna just give you a brief high-level overview of what we have going on. So, and it's really broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 is the Ryder lift station improvements. This is currently underway. This includes construction of new submersible non-clogged lift station, including wet well pumps, piping, all the components necessary for that lift station. We had a $706,000 construction estimate for this. We've already received bids, came in at $709,578. Notice to proceed was issued a week ago. We're anticipating substantial completion in early October with final completion in early November, with total project cost at $1,150,000 for this phase 1, the Ryder lift station improvements. Phase 2 is the TMMI lift station improvements. This is the much larger lift station out there that conveys more of the wastewater. We're looking at designing a new 3 million gallon per day triplex lift station that includes all of the related components. There's still demolition of the existing lift station, and the extent of that is still to be determined if any of that makes sense to salvage or not. Proposing this project be delivered as a BOT, which is build, operate, transfer, a little bit different project delivery method than your traditional design, bid, build. Allows us to speed up the project, for one, and most importantly, to help meet Toyota's desired timeframe. Also allows the city to select their contractor rather than having to go with the low bidder. Involves the contractor earlier in the process. We've received 2 proposals to date, and we anticipate selecting a contractor within the next week. We will have, so the BOT allows us to avoid surprises as well. We're not waiting on bids and not knowing where they're going to come in until the last minute. We'll work hand in hand with the contractor, and we will have a guaranteed maximum price on this project earlier in the process. So estimated total project cost, $10,550,000. You know, I know when people see numbers, they tend to want to stick with them. No, that's an early estimate for that. We were really close on phase 1. That was a much smaller project, easier to estimate. This is a big piece. We're just getting to that point where we're going to start working with a selected contractor, and we'll be able to dial that in as we proceed. Schedule for phase 2. Once a contractor is selected, we'll work diligently to complete design and submit for permits next month. We would anticipate receiving permits and issuing notice to proceed in July of 26 and having construction complete roughly a year later. That would allow us to have that upgraded or new lift station in place so that by the time the peak flows during the summer hit, we would be prepared for those. So that's just a quick high-level interview. Again, I'm Dean Rogers. The project manager unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, so if you have some real technical questions, might not be able to help you, but happy to take any questions that you might have.
The upgrade to the sewage systems for current expansion, does it include capacity for future expansions?
It does, yeah. It's well, the short answer is yes.
And will this be able to be used in July of 2027, or parts of it used before that?
The Ryder lift station will be the phase 1 Ryder lift station will be operational before that. the new lift station and new force main to the plant would be the summer of '27.
What drives the need for this?
Increased flows.
When you say increased flows, are you talking about groundwater or,
No, increased wastewater flows from increased operations at Toyota.
Has it got specifics in it for the hazardous waste that might be produced by a battery plant?
Well, and the folks from Toyota can correct me with this, but Toyota does have their own pretreatment facilities. So they do an initial treatment for anything that is considered hazardous. In that battery plant, I believe that's just a battery assembly plant. We're not anticipating anything hazardous coming from that facility.
But if there was some sort of an accident or something that needed to be cleaned up, would it be used, that sewage system be used for that, or would it have to have a whole new hazmat company come in and clean up any type of accidents?
I mean, I can't speak to that other than knowing that anything hazardous currently at Toyota goes through their pretreatment process.
Thanks.
all right. Who would be awarding these contracts? Is it the city of Princeton?
It is the city of Princeton.
All right, Dean, thank you very much. Next on the list is Patty Van Oven.
You want to speak, or you want to speak, or you want to submit? Okay.
Okay, well, no, we can just
Thank
keep
you.
that. All right, next be old business in. Is anybody here from the animal shelter? I-69-64. South Gibson Teen Center. or-
Chuck's here.
Chuck, speak on the I-69-64.
The I-69-64 development included an investment from the county to extend a sewer main from the city of Francisco, town of Francisco, put a lift station and then everything in. It is nearing completion. I don't know the exact date it's online. Tammy Hack and our Economic Development Corporation, along with the county commissioners, the mayor of Oakland City, are currently in negotiations with some developers looking to make some investment on that corner out there to bring some much-needed businesses and revenue to the eastern portion of the county. So we're looking forward to it being completed, and hopefully we get some nice businesses out there.
All right, thanks, Chuck.
Is that also gonna have room for residential or anything around that area at all?
I mean, the sewer main would be available for that, but it's kind of, there's some reclaimed coal mine ground in there and stuff, so I really don't look for a lot of residential.
All right, anyone from South Gibson Teen Center? All right, next meeting will be May the 11th at 6 o'clock. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Yes.
When he's giving this picture, did you take in consideration of all the solar farms that is in that area, in the Patoka and Union Township? All the tax breaks they got? Was this all included in that?
No, there's none of that included in
On the taxes?
well, in on our discussions here anyway, as far as that. Now, I don't think anything would, I don't think the taxes would start yet, would they? I mean,
We don't have anything to
When
do
those solar
Yeah.
facilities went into service, but we did not make
Oh, they got a
special
big
consideration.
yeah.
We don't give a basis.
I'm not sure what,
And I got the floor right now, sir. Now then, also, the city, I'm just gonna ask him, is that gonna be better, the system that never did work out there, that the city of Princeton put in for the sewer out there on 350 South, that had the whole done for 4 or 5 years, and it never did really work? That cost millions of dollars?
well, I think these are questions that we're just gonna have to, I mean, I can't answer that question for you. I mean, and I don't think any of these people here,
We weren't engaged in a part of the project.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do not.
Okay.
yeah, so I I've asked for a motion to adjourn. Do I have one? George made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Tim seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you.
The road estimates, is that for the whole county, the 45 million, or just the Toyota
You're
areas?
more than welcome to take a snapshot of that if you would
Okay.
like.
Thank you.